the recommendations of the Institute and have accepted the recommendation to consider CA qualification as equivalent to post-graduation, that's PG degree as they call it in India. So now, congratulations to all chartered accountants who are now equivalent to masters, having a master's degree rather. I'm sure this paves way for universities, institutes, and countries for that matter, to consider the qualification as equivalent to master's degree. So based on our earlier representation that we had made to the Indian Embassy regarding this issue, they have requested the Ministry of External Affairs to take this matter up with the Kuwait authorities. In this regard, I'm pleased to inform that Ministry of External Affairs is working on it, and they had come back to the Institute, and Institute in turn had come back to us requesting certain clarifications. So when we responded to it, so I'm sure things are moving in the positive direction, and I'm sure this is a positive move. So we hope, in days to come, we should see some development and Ministry of External Affairs writing to the embassy or to the appropriate authorities in Kuwait to consider CA as equivalent to a master's degree, and which could help people for their residency purposes and issues. On examination front, we've successfully conducted the November exams and the opt-out exams in January. The January exams, the results are expected to be out very soon by 23rd, 24th of March. So all the best to the students who had appeared. And the May examination timetables are also out. So as you all know, Kuwait is a center, and we request you all to pass on this information to your friends, colleagues, acquaintances who themselves or their children would like to appear for the exams, and they can appear in Kuwait. Our next edition of e-newsletter Jagrati will be released in the first week of April 2021. Though we have received enough technical and non-technical articles for this issue and issues to come, we urge members to keep writing and contributing. We are in curfew 5 to 5, so there is enough time for people to contribute and write. So we wish to keep this newsletter going for years to come, and perhaps this will only be possible if we all contribute towards it. But before that, I must tell you, we have organized a treasure hunt on 25th March 2021. Our last date for registration is tomorrow, 21st March. We have received an overwhelming response, and we all look forward to this exciting and innovative game organized by the Social and Youth Committee of the chapter. And now, without much ado, let me call upon CA Rohit Agarwal, who will introduce the speaker for the evening and take the proceedings further. Thank you. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, Keza, for a brief update of our chapter activities and this one. So, first of all, thank you very much to give me honor to introduce CA Narasimhan. CA Narasimhan is a futurist, a GRC professional, keynote speaker, and partner of Ken & Company, and belong from Bangalore, India. His areas of practice includes data analytics, risk-based audit, privacy impact assessment, internal audits, information system assurance, internal financial controls, and SOX compliance and SOC audits. In the past few years, he has also been advising in the emerging areas of technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, and cybersecurity and big data. He has regularly spoken on these domains in the national and international forums. He has assisted a wide variety of entities from startup to large corporates in the fields of BFSI, telecom, retail, fintech, startup, airline, e-commerce, etc. He is faculty for DISA, CISA, and courses on blockchain technology. He has authorized more than 4 books for ICI, KSCAA, etc. on technology. He is a regular speaker on technology at various national and international conferences of ICI, ISACA, CII, FICCI. He has often addressed the ISACA International Conference at Asia, CACS Europe, CACS, and Africa CACS, and was often among the top-rated youngest speaker. He has spoken at international conferences at Dubai, Malaysia, Bangkok, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries. He has been identified as one of the top 10 influential consulting leaders 2020, an annual recognition for torch players in the consulting sphere by CEO Insight magazine. So if I continue, it will go on and on. So without continuing, I should hand over to the expert for the day. So over to you, CA Narasimhan.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to be a part of this elite community. Hope my voice is clear and hope you're able to hear me.
Yes, Narasimhan, it is very clear.
Wonderful. Let me quickly share my screen and, while we get started. Fantastic. So are we there? I hope you're able to see my screen.
Yes, Narasimhan, it is clear.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so a very good evening to all of you. I hope wherever you're staying from, you're doing safe. It's been unfortunate times and interesting times. I always see positivity in adversity. Just to give you a context, during lockdown, April, May, June, which is I think the peak lockdown in India, I had done close to about 120 plus webinars in a span of about those 3 months. It was literally me waking up, run for the webinar, So I was so very occupied, and the best part was I used to read up every day for that webinar. That webinar of 2 hours, 3 hours. I spent a good 5 hours reading and researching. The amount of knowledge which I accumulated, I think I myself started enjoying that phase. So that's on one side. But the reality today, we all of us have to appreciate the way in which the profession is going to go in the future. Let us be very, very clear, is not something what we saw in the past. And that is, I think, perhaps, if you ask me, COVID-19 is a eureka moment for everybody. We suddenly realized something, importance of family, importance of health, importance of changing trends, importance of behavior, some people importance of saving money. In our professional perspective, I will say it is the need for embracing technology, at the same time making ourselves ready for what I call it as a version 2.0 or a better version of ourselves. And that, my dear friends, let me tell you, in the days to come, your internal audit exercise, your statutory audit exercise, all of these will have new elements to it. And few of those elements are cybersecurity, data privacy, and financial forensics. I would not say that every engagement would have each of these, but we as players who are going to add in value into the ecosystem will have to have a strong fundamental understanding of these things. And there are plenty of opportunities which are going to come up. It's only a question of now or in a span of 6 months or in a span of a year. And let me remind you, this is the best time to invest in ourselves to upskill. So without much delay, let me quickly head into it. I think an introduction about myself was given, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. General thoughts, the views are that of mine, not of my organization, but we share a lot of practical case studies and things like that. Let's see how best it works. So I'm going to stick on to very basic things, not going to have too many things as such, because we have about an hour and a half plus about 15 minutes off for Q&A. And of course, I would like to make it interactive. Feel free to, when I post questions, you can unmute yourself or, drop it in the chat window, whichever seems fine. I'm not a big fan of polls. And I know most of you are, watching 2 screens in parallel, the India-England match on one side and perhaps the webinar, looking at what is exciting in the webinar and then see whether it was a boundary or a Virat Kohli smashed a 6 or whatever it is. But be that as it may, so we have a simple agenda and I'll keep it very simple and crisp and to the point so that you are able to actually get that value addition. So we're going to discuss about what the new normal is, and I'm sure NF has spoken about, but I'll give from a slightly different perspective. The second is on the cyber security. Why is it growing in importance? What are the new IT risks which are coming up? And from there, I'll go up the ladder to cyber security. The third is data privacy. something which is spoken about across the globe. If you probably ask me, the era before Corona was perhaps the era of security, information security. The era after Corona is going to be, the era of information security coupled with data privacy. That's going to be a very, very important, crucial element. And then comes your element of forensics. Okay. So having these, three in consideration, let's quickly head into the changing trends, or what I call it as the new normal. We all know it's the Black Swan event. It's created a global health, economic pandemic, crash of the oil economy. I'm sure we have noticed it. And you being, in the core business there, you will be able to realize, of course, now it's picking up. But more importantly for me, what COVID is, it's a transformational event. It's one of those special cases. If we go back into history, look into any such special events, before and after, it's been a significant and massive change. And this concept of digital epiphany is very important. Epiphany is a sudden realization of something. Your son or daughter suddenly starts realizing that what you're saying is right. Or you start realizing that, what my father told when I was a small kid is right, and all the while I've been arguing. Now, on the lighter side, it is always said, you will never realize the statements of your parents until your child makes it, slightly, or proves it otherwise. You then start thinking, oh, what my parents did was right to me, correct? On the jovial side, but this is, coming back to the context, this COVID is actually a digital epiphany, a sudden realization, hey, technology is important. And we're now heading into the era of BC, DC, and ADC. Before Corona, during Corona, and after the death of Corona. I'm not sure when the after death of Corona is. I always thought 2021 is going to be after death of Corona, but we do not know how this is going to probably turn out, right? We're still seeing, things changing. Some cases it's becoming worse. Countries are again going back to lockdown. So be that as it may, what is exactly this is changing? My perspective is that three broad things have changed. And I'll tell you why, and I'll bring you the context because it makes it more relevant. First, the work we are doing is significantly changing. Machines and humans are getting more and more integrated. You might be thinking, hey, that's happening in some other country, that's happening in some other company, not with me. The question is only of time. Maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year, or maybe 5 years. But let me remind you, humans or machines are working more and more together, where machines are going to take up a lot of repetitive activities. RPAs are coming into, robotics are coming into. And at the same time, Industry 4.0, my dear friends, is significantly influencing the way in which the entire world works. Name it blockchain, name it IoT, name it your, whatever type of model. On the workforce side, interesting things are actually happening. You have to attract and engage younger people, the millennials, the generation Z. We need to deal with all these folks. These, I call them as the social media folks who are glued into Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and whatnot. And these are the folks who are going to join our workforce in the next near future. And, they wouldn't be surprised that, on a jovial note, don't be surprised that, there's one youngster who went to the data server room and took a selfie and posted on Instagram, hey, this is how our data server room looks like, on a jovial note. We're talking about generation which is having a very, very broad mindset, correct? And at the same time, companies today are no longer going to follow only the employee model. Over a point in time, they will start following the partner and the contracting model, where we're going to talk about, it's called as the gig economy. That's a buzzword which is coming up. A gig economy is where you have a long-term phenomenon of short-term jobs. Quite a contrasting statement, I know. When I say a long-term phenomenon, that means you're going to have jobs which are of short duration. You hire them, you utilize their services, and then say goodbye. It's going to be more of a contractor-driven model. And an employee or a colleague will work for you only if and only if he finds a lot of learning involved in that particular engagement. And after a point of time, he'll leave. Gone are the days where you will say that, an employee will stick on to me until the retirement. If that happens in the future, that's actually great, but I have my own perception on it. And today the global outsourcing is becoming such an important thing. You will not believe, during the pandemic, I got requests for doing audit, okay, in 4 different countries. And I said, I cannot travel. He said, no problem. That is the reason we are giving it to you. And, I was able to procure it at, probably at maybe about 30 to 40% discount of the existing cost. But they're actually seeing a value addition at the same time cost reduction. So which means global outsourcing is going to become the order of the day. And not to forget, your workplace itself is going to change. We're talking about phygital workplaces, meaning there are going to be some folks who are physically present. There are going to be some folks who are digitally present. And we need to work in this sort of an environment where we have much, much more dynamic. I came across a few colleges. They have told the students that those of you who can come, colleges and universities, those of you who can come to classes and attend, please attend. Rest of you can actually go ahead and sit at home and listen to the classes. So the faculty is there. There is some sort of a video camera or some sort of a technology which is being used. And there are a few students there. And the rest of them are happily listening from their home. Work is also happening the same way. Which means we are going to have an integrated solution. And I'm sure most of you, when you opted for work from home, you had to relax a whole lot of your IT policies. Your VPNs have to be enabled, your work from had to be enabled, you started copying the data from your laptop to somebody else's system, and a bunch of crazy things we did. In fact, we lost track of what all we did, correct? So if you go back and start looking into what your audit logs were, you yourself would have been surprised, like, why did I do this? I would have had a simpler solution. But that's basically what's happening. And let me tell you, this is going to increase in the near future. So this is a simple example. I'm sure you are able to see my image out here. This is the factory of the future. On the extreme left, we're talking about logistics 4.0, where we are saying that, hey, you know what? It's a fully integrated supply chain where my suppliers, my vendors, my customers to a certain extent, provided they're B2B, get a visibility of my inventory, my stock. I'm going to use cloud computing, I'm going to use big data, I'm going to use a whole lot of analytics, I'm going to use IoT and a bunch of crazy stuff. And all of this, we are expected to audit. So things are definitely going to change. So the key thing which we'll have to remember from now and going forward, technology has changed what we do. Technology has changed how we do it. Technology has changed when we do it and where we do it. It's a very, very important, powerful statement. Look at those 4 words. What, how, when, where. Everything, my friends, technology has actually changed. But what has not changed is the fundamental domain of business. Business remains business. The way in which you do the business has changed. So which means the fundamental audit domain expertise which we have, the fundamental finance expertise which we have, has to just be altered in a slight manner so that we are able to wear the hat of what the future requires. And if this was not enough for you to scare you, let me try to show you something more which may probably scare you a little. And what's that? That is nothing but the World Economic Forum Future of Job Reports. Highly recommended all you professionals to go through it, especially if you are in the early stages of your career, or if you are even in the later stages of your career, but you want to consider what the future is for your kids and probably the next generation. World Economic Forum Future of Jobs Report, October 2020, it was published. It talks about list of jobs which are going to be relevant and list of jobs which is going to be redundant. And when I speak about redundant jobs, they speak about jobs such as administrative, secretaries, ops managers. I was okay with all those. But point 4, 5, and 6 actually made me very, 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 pained, if I could probably use the word. Accountants, data entry clerks, auditors. Are we all going to disappear? I remember reading one of, an international journal article which said, is accountant the next extinct species? Perhaps it had a lot of questions for each of us to ask. But the key message which I figured out from that is, if we do the same job the same way what we did in the past, we would definitely be extinct. If we are able to re-innovate, adapt technology and make it much more better, improvise our productivity, add value, and bring in new things, yes, that's where we have professionals for. Okay, so what exactly are these cyber risks heading into the second, the first topic which I wanted to make a mention? I gave you a perspective of what the new normal is. What are these cyber risks and why are they growing in importance? Remember, the newer the technology, the newer are the risks. A phishing campaign is one of the biggest which has taken place in the last 1 year. And I'm sure all of you know what a phishing campaign is, just sending some sort of a lucrative email, making it look as though it is real, as though it is urgent, asking you to immediately act upon it. And you go click and you give your sensitive information and your account is actually breached. Phishing campaigns are significantly increasing. And there is a variant of a phishing campaign called as spear phishing campaign, which is targeted at specific individuals or specific C-suite executives and trying to use all possible means. In fact, I had an interesting case where somebody had, written a mail to me, which looked very, very, very legitimate. But when I went to the fine print, I found 2 or 3 spelling mistakes, and this person had written from US and it didn't sound like a US accent or a language, and I immediately flagged it. Lucky was I, because it was actually a phishing campaign. He had observed, seen my Facebook profile or my LinkedIn profile, I'm not too sure. And based on what I post, he had actually sent out an email to me. Very, very interesting targeted spear phishing campaign. So we have to be very, very careful. Second, ransomware attacks. Now this is increasing. A ransomware is simply put, it is basically kidnapping your software. It will encrypt your entire software, and the moment it is encrypted, if it has to be decrypted, it will ask you for money or a ransom. In simple language, imagine yourself going back to your home and you using your key to unlock your home door, and the door says, hey, you know what? If you want me to let you in, you need to do this for me. Correct? So that's basically what a ransomware. Trojans, which we always know, which existed forever, it's only increasing. Work from home attacks. Many of them are not aware that the same laptop which is used for work from home is also used for the employee's daughter or kid's assignment. And what happens? The kid tries to browse something, accidentally clicks on some link, a prohibited link, and a link with a Trojan, tries to download a game, whatnot. And let me remind you, I saw a case, on a jovial note. I was discussing with one of a client, and the client's colleague joined in, and I was in a Zoom meet because I was the administrator. I was supposed to admit it. I got a message saying, Pinky Rabbit wants to join the meeting. I was taken aback. I thought somebody's trying to hack me. I thought it was a typical Zoom bombing attack. And I'm sure you have read what a Zoom bombing is. When 2 people are conversing, suddenly an unexpected one person drops in. So I thought it was a Zoom bombing attack. I was taken aback. And this kept on happening. And at the same time, my friend, my client on the other end said, hey, you know what? My colleague is trying to join in and she's saying that she's not able to join. Are you seeing any alert? Then I said, I can see something called as a Pinky Rabbit trying to log in. And only once I admitted, I realized that, the colleague's daughter was attending online classes, and for whatever reason, she was grouped in some Pinky Rabbit, whatever XYZ she had her own version of story. While this may sound a little funny, but that's the reality. We're talking about these newer types of risks, a whole lot of personal data being stored, a whole lot of unauthorized data is being stored, and more importantly, the same system is used to access a legitimate as well as an illegitimate source. state-sponsored attacks. Let me remind you, this is something very, very, very painful, very unfortunate. States are sponsoring, and I don't want to name them, but that's the reality. And when a state itself sponsors for an attack, you can imagine what is the intensity of these attacks. And I'm sure many of them you have read online in the recent past. And not to forget, many of them have started moving into work from home technologies, artificial intelligence, RPAs, all these things. Have we forgotten to look into this newer technologies? I'll give you a classical case. You know, there was a scenario, let me not name the entity. They had brought in an RPA solution, a robotic process solution, for doing some bit of a job where, you know, they had a username, password, they had to log into an email ID, download certain documents, push it, and then sort of do it. And unfortunately, that login ID password, you know, somebody in the Chrome browser settings, there is an option called remember username password, and that was enabled. And what happened was a hacker got access to it. He got to know what the username and password was, and the same username password was also used for SAP access. And it was also the same username password for a VPN access. You can imagine every possible, because the organization had a single sign-on technology. Hacker just got access to it, and using that username password, he just randomly started passing entries in SAP. You'd be surprised that, you know, on one side the robotic RPA was passing data entries, on the other side, you know, the hacker also was passing, and more importantly, the auditor presumed that whole of these entries were just passed by the RPA software, and he just totally ignored it by just doing 1 or 2 sample checks. My dear friends, it is very crucial when you look into RPA software or any automation, we need to compulsorily make sure, is there a check and balance before it's finally posted? So these are the newer technology risks which I'm talking about. And let's look at a few of these attacks which took place. You know, COVID-19 urgent precaution measures campaign. A mail used to be sent. This typically happened in the US and certain places, even in Dubai and, you know, the GCC, where mails were sent saying that these are the urgent precautions. This is the government app, download it. And for all, you know, people downloaded it, the data was breached. I'm sure most of you were aware of the Johns Hopkins infection map, which was, you know, Johns Hopkins is a university where they kept on updating the COVID statistics. And there were multiple fake maps which came up and which started telling that, you know, there a neighbor next to you is sort of affected. I'm just giving you a few examples which actually took place. And I'm sure each of you will be able to relate to this, you know, if it started happening in your organization. Fake contract tracing apps which started downloading a whole bunch of information, started taking information about you, your personal details. Fictitious charities saying the name of I lost the job, I lost this, I'm helpless. Coronavirus themed ransomware campaign. Actually, you know, there was a fake message saying your system is subject to a ransomware attack. In reality, it was not. Okay. And once I clicked that link, actual ransomware got downloaded. You know, these are funny things which we are actually noticing. The mask-based malware attack, okay, where, you know, people started advertising, sending out across emails saying that, you know, we will provide bulk PPE mask XYZ, and it was actually embedded with, you know, malware. There's something called as a steganography, where image can be hidden with a code, and you download the image without your knowledge. The image is actually executing a code. This happens typically in Android phones. In iOS, the possibilities are fairly lesser. Because in iOS, you'll have to download a software. It has to go only through Apple Store, whereas in Android, it may not be the scenario. Zoom bombing, I think I gave you an example of that. So these are the typical attacks which are taking place, and I'm only noticing this is constantly increasing. Let's look into this one particular image. This, I took it some time back. You know, I'm sure you're able to see this sort of a video or a GIF, however you can call it. This is typically a real-time, I would not say exactly a real-time, but reasonably a real-time attack threat landscape. You can notice that each and every person somewhere in this particular region is actually attacking. And that's the reality. there's an attack which is happening from US to somewhere in Philippines, Egypt to somewhere in Colombia, and this is going on constantly. And let me remind you, these are something which are constant. So it is not just sufficient that we have upskilled our cyber defenses. We need to ensure the last person in the organization is made aware of these risks and challenges. So how do I gear up for these challenges? What is it that I'll have to look into it? The first and fundamental thing which all of us will have to do is hit the reset button. And why do I say this? We seriously need to rethink what we are doing. A fundamental question, if you remember in costing, we had this concept called zero-based budgeting. We started fundamentally questioning what on earth are we doing? Is this the right way to approach a budget? That is something which we have to actually bring in. Is this the right way in which I will measure the risk? Is this the right way in which I should be looking into information, statistics, whatever it may be? So that's the first fundamental question which we have to look into. The second, we need to look into I and T risks. Let me remind you, it's no longer IT, it is I and T. Why? Gone are the days where we said information technology. Today, information has its own perspective, technology has its own perspective. And that's why the ISACA framework, which you look into any of the recent publications, they've started approaching it slightly differently. They focus on I and T risk. And most of us, we are in internal audit, we take care of the top part. We look into the strategic, environmental, market, credit, operation compliance. Little do we focus on the INT. And let me remind you, this INT risk is equally pervasive across the organization. As much as your strategy involves enterprise risk, your INT also involves. And this INT is in every pillar which you notice. And we need to keep in mind that what exactly is the benefit or value which we are getting. Are we implementing newer IT programs and what is the risk of that? Are we engaging IT for service delivery and what is the risk pertaining to that? And not to forget the cybersecurity and information security. So we're looking into a very, very large set of attributes. And this is where the way in which our risk matrices and heat matrices are defined has to be relooked. I'm sure we have the likelihood and impact, low risk and high risk, try to look into mitigate the high risk, etc. I think we have to change the perspective. The question is it a good risk or a bad risk? Because risk can never be ignored. So we need to see what is the opportunity value, at the same time, what exactly is my acceptable risk. I can just shut down everything and be happy. I was reading one nice statement which is, which is the most safest computer system? People had posted a lot of answers, and the answer to that was simply a computer which is shut down. Correct? But you can't try to be that way. You can't operate in silos. We need to live in this world, which means that we need to understand what exactly the risk we're dealing with. And therefore, the level of risk appetite and the level of opportunity has to be looked into. So do not measure it from an impact versus likelihood. Measure it from a level of risk appetite versus opportunity value. Can I accept it? If not, can I transfer and share it? A classical example, let me give you just to illustrate it. Many of the companies have started their data transformation, digital transformation journey. Many of them said that, oh, we have to become a digital company. We will migrate to the cloud. We will have we'll have legacy servers. Everything is in the cloud, 24/7 working. Fantastic. Now, do you know how well the cloud works? Do you know how to monitor that? Do you have your BCP and other things in place? Well, you may not be an expert because you're just slowly moving in it. So in those scenarios, it makes a lot of sense for you to transfer or share this responsibility with certain authorized vendors, cloud service providers definitely has had in the past outages, and it definitely has impacted. Forget that. Our social media giants, including the Facebook and Instagram, definitely, and LinkedIn, has definitely had some sort of an outages, and you and I face difficulty sometimes when we are trying to log in. But the real question is it in a level of acceptable? Correct? So that is where we will have to sort of focus it on. And with the corona trying to come into picture, the service levels initially was in prevention and response, and I think now we have to focus on the recovery. Try to mitigate the impact of the risks issues with a consistent business continuity plans which are in place. Let me also remind you, we need to develop a mentality of what is a good risk versus a bad risk. And I'm reiterating this because without risk, it is just not possible for us to live through it. So having these facts in our mind and in the background, our risk registers have to be relooked into it. How many of them have a IT or an information technology risk register? We may have a procurement risk register. We may have a record order to cash risk register. We may have, a HR risk register. Do we have a information technology or IT department specific risk register? And is that risk register sort of comprehensive? Is it focusing on governance? Is it focusing on security? Is it focusing on third-party vendor management? One very important principle which came up during this cybersecurity days, or rather this cybersecurity issue which came up during this COVID days, was something called as fourth party risk. What is a fourth party? So you are outsourcing certain tasks to a third party. The third party in turn outsource certain part, to another party. That party becomes your fourth party. Now, not only should I focus on my third party risk, I should also take care of my fourth party risks. We're talking about a culture in the future which is going to be driven with serverless technologies, with no code, low code, and bunch of these interesting technologies are actually coming up. With all these given things in place, I think we need to relook into our very risk registers. So starting from your governance, security, vendor management, IT operations, your backup, your business continuity, your HR, your access management, a whole lot of these things have to be relooked into when it comes to those risk registers. And we need to ensure the so-called ECG of your risk is within the appetite. It doesn't go beyond these boundaries. And over a point in time, ensure that your risk capacity is reduced and your risk appetite is increased. That is where we will have to transition to. And try to develop scenarios. Try to develop business objectives. Try to look into certain scenario-specific cases where try to look into bottom-up integration, scenario identification, external factors, internal factors. A bunch of risk assessment has to be done typically from an INT perspective. And these, my dear friends, will give a fresh perspective of INT. And what are your risk scenarios or loss events? What are the factors behind employees or state-sponsored attacks? What are the resources they're targeting? What is the timing of the attack? What is the effect of it? All of these have to be looked into. Just to give an example, ATM attacks happen in the night around 11:45 p.m. to 12:30. Why? Because the ATM limits are set for 24 hours, which is basically having a cutoff at 12 a.m. or 11:59. Okay, so did we ever question, or have we ever questioned, why can't I set that as 24 hours instead of just the actual clock time? These are questions which we'll have to relook into. These are questions which we need to ask, and that's where we actually start becoming better. So what are the so-called cyber security tips? What are the so-called audit checklists which we'll have to look into? Let's spend a few minutes. First and foremost, from a cybersecurity angle, employees must secure their home network. A lesser spoken point, but a very crucial point. Why? If your home Wi-Fi security itself is weak, a perpetrator can attack, and through which he can access your network. When he can access your network, he can indirectly access your laptop. When he can access your laptop, he can access your entire organization. That's the reality. I'm sure most of you will say, hey, you know what? I have a Wi-Fi device which has a very complex password, which I've written down, very difficult to remember. All those things, great. You know how easy it is to reset that password? Just visit 192.168.1.1. Of course, after my session is over, don't do it during my session. Okay, otherwise the connection will get terminated. It will give you a login page. Some people, if you're using a different Wi-Fi router, 2.1, 3.1, whatever, default. Enter your username and password. 95 to 99% of you have chosen the default password as admin, and that is not yet changed. Try it out for yourself. You yourself will realize it. And if you can access it, anybody in your system or your premises can access it. Those are the risks. So you'll have to be very, very careful. Ensure every device has an endpoint vulnerability, and very important, an interesting tool called as a data loss prevention tool. This can actually sort of track what exactly is being transferred, copied, and this can limit the usage, to what is permitted and what is not permitted. Assuming in an event where you have to use your own system for your kids' education or for college assignments, etc., create a separate profile with a restrictive rules and enable it. Speak to your company. I'm sure they'll definitely come forward, because everybody has similar issues. The third, something which most of us fail to notice, is updating of patches. We often or we seldom do not even restart our computer until that icon on top is forcing us to do it. But those are critical for us to understand what are the patches which Microsoft and other publishers are actually pushing it across. Very important is file sharing sites. Your Microsoft Teams, your Google Drive, your OneDrive or SharePoint, these are favorite areas for hackers to attack. And most of the time what they do is they create a fictitious link which looks quite similar to that of the original link. And therefore, multi-factor authentication is something which is very, very critical. Let's not forget, privacy laws across the globe are increasing. I will touch this a little later. And vendor, third-party, and fourth-party risks are obviously increasing. So your vendor is enabled work from home. So your vendor may not have the same sort of security which your organization is actually having. So these are all questions which we need to seriously look into it. So if you're auditing in 2021, going back to the year 2020, what could probably be those few areas from a cybersecurity or from a technology standpoint? First, access controls are the most critical. How have the approvals been given? Are they documented or are they audit trails? And what are the users, the so-called privileged users, doing? This is something very, very, very critical. To give an instance, in the month of April or the month of March, when the lockdown was announced, or let's say even in June when the lockdown was announced, I'm sure there's been going to be a lot of emergency changes which is being performed by your IT department. The real question is, how have they actually performed? Sit with them, review the audit logs, get an understanding whether these have actually taken place. It is okay if they have happened in an emergency, because we all know that's why it's called as an emergency. But the question is, was there some sort of a compensatory control? Was there a preventive or a detective or even a corrective action which is being taken? The second, look from a technology perspective. How have they configured the access? Many scenarios, they have disabled two-factor, they have disabled, mandatory encryption, they have disabled or increased the bandwidth size. A whole lot of these restrictions have been relaxed. Remote access scalability, many of them have been given the accessibility. And the worst of all, nobody has perhaps audited what are my list of remote users, what are they trying to access, whether it seems legitimate or not. I had a scenario, this is an actual case, where a person was logging in at 3:30 or maybe 4:30 or 5:30 sometime in the morning or evening, depending on the time zones, from a location A. In the next 5 minutes, the next access using the same credentials was about 100 miles away, or probably about 100 kilometers away. See, if it was 3 to 4 kilometer radius, sometimes even 10 to 20 kilometers radius, it is understandable because of those internet servers which they dynamically keep changing. But in certain cases, it also happened 100, 200 kilometers, and more importantly, it also happened from a different country. Now, come on, this is something very, very serious. This means that there has been a serious compromise of that person's credentials, and we need to relook into it. You might say, I have the firewall system in place. Does your firewall perhaps track geographical location-based access for each of your login credentials? Those are the real questions which you'll have to look into. Let's not forget the third-party security, which I told you. Do we have sufficient licenses for remote tools? This is something very, very critical. Otherwise, you're bound by contractual commitments, fines, and penalties in case you're violating the license terms. Insider threats. Many of the employees have been fired across the globe. The hatred, the fear, all of these is actually running into their mind. And all of this, my dear friends, has actually created some sort of a rivalry, and let's not forget that. And not to forget one other important element, SIEM, which is basically your event management, system integration, event management. All of these reports, have they been on a regular basis reviewed? Now, these becomes your areas where as auditors, you need not go into that much level of technology. Sit with the developer, go through that and ask him, or sit with the tech guy and ask him, because please keep in mind, an auditor's perspective is totally different from that of a technology folk. Business continuity, have there been scenarios of single point of failures? Have there been cases of war gaming? You know, some persons who you didn't want to, but still trying to gain access. What were the recovery plans? I went for outsourcing strategy. I went for a cloud sourcing strategy. What was the scenario? How much of my data is on the cloud? Is the data encrypted? Does somebody have access to it? Typically a public cloud. And am I meeting my customer SLAs, or are vendors meeting my SLAs in case there's been breach, there's been some problem, a security incident, etc. So these are a few areas which you should probably be looking into. And before I jump into the next bucket, which is of privacy, I thought it makes sense to look into some of these best practices. Each of you in your organization, please relook into your work from home policy. Many organizations adopted for what is called as a BYOD, bring your own device, because they do not have enough laptops. So they said you use your home laptop itself for official use. But did you review it? Did you even check if there was an antivirus into it? Did you check if there was an MDM software, a mobile device management software? Do you have multi-factor authentication for your VPN to get access? Are regular training being given to your staff and your employees, to your vendors, to handle complexities, PII, etc.? How are you dealing with your vendors? Critical vendors, have you subjected them to audit? Have you reviewed the business continuity? What exactly is your cyber liability insurance? Many organizations haven't even opted for that. And am I using only approved portals for data exchange? Am I just using, okay, some free software, I found it, I'm just using it and sharing it? So these are all some real questions which we all need to ask. At this point, I would like to pause and open up this forum for a few Q&A, just to bring in a perspective of what you or your organization or your set of folks are experiencing, and some bit of ideas and thought process and some discussion. A few minutes for the audience to share your thoughts. Kindly unmute yourself, or you can drop it in the chat window. Any questions from a cyber security perspective, I'll be happy to take it. I hope folks were listening, and I know the India match is going on quite interesting.
No, that's right, but I'm sure everybody's listening. Everybody's around here. Anybody has any questions or something, we could just...
Yeah, better means that they can post in the chat window so that we can see and answer it.
Yeah. I think...
Okay, so there are no more questions. Don't worry, India's got to win the match with the mammoth target. So relax. So let's quickly head into...
There's a question come up. Yeah.
Sure, please go ahead.
There's a question from Baby John.
Please go ahead.
How much is multi-factor authentication vulnerable?
Okay, see, let me tell you, in this world of security, nothing is foolproof. But what a multi-factor does is it reduces the possibility or reduces the risk. And normally a multi-factor authentication, the authentication is driven through an independent server or an independent party. You know, companies like Duo Security, Symantec. Now they would have integrated, and the possibility of breach on their systems is fairly lesser. However, just a few days back in India, there was a new type of an SMS OTP phishing attack, where a phishing attack was targeted to so few people, and some sort of a software was installed, and that software used to read your entire SMS, including that of the OTP. So the real question of a two-factor disappeared, because I know your second factor of authentication as well. But having said that, remember one simple statement: the stronger the controls become, the stronger the hackers also become. So it is not like, you know, I have put on something and I'm forever safe. You are safe only until a hacker knows how to hack it, and this is going to be a continuous exercise. So we all have to learn from, you know, scenarios around it. But yes, definitely some bit of hygiene will help us out. So that's the answer to the first question. The next question, which I noticed, is something on blockchain. Shanta Shetty. Okay. First and foremost, blockchain itself is a very huge topic to probably discuss. But let me tell you one very simple, you know, without going too much into the blockchain concept, let me tell you one couple of facts. I'm sure you must have read somebody saying that, you know, somebody's Bitcoin wallet was hacked or attacked. And we say that blockchain is the safest security means. Simple. Blockchain is safe. Bitcoin is safe. Those Bitcoin is stored in a wallet. To access a wallet, you require a username and password. And what did that gentleman do? He saved the username and password in a notepad file, which said as password, and it was stored on the desktop. Hacker got access to that computer. He went through that file. He noticed this is the username password. He immediately logged into the Bitcoin wallet, transferred the money. This fellow comes forward and says, Bitcoin is lost. Correct? So whose carelessness was this? It was the users. So fundamental issues of security will be relevant even when it comes to blockchain. So that let me remind you, my dear friends, you may have the best or their mind. Strictly impact on blockchain from a security standpoint, it is no doubt going to strengthen to a limited extent, but the fundamentals of information security still have to be adhered to. Where can it add value from a blockchain standpoint? Your logs, your transactions, all of these are going to be immutable. From the source to the destination, you can actually figure out who did what, when, why, and how. Correct? So that's why if you say Bitcoin, you can actually identify who is sold to whom, who is done to what. But the problem is, it will only say this is the virtual address. How do I trace from that virtual address to the physical person? That's the question mark. Whereas when you talk about enterprise blockchain, these things are possible. You can set it up. So therefore, it is only going to better the security, but there are definitely going to be certain fundamental issues. And next is our project manager related to finance. I'm not too sure. Gen Z, you've asked this question. Our project manager related to finance. I'm not too sure what your question is. Could you please clarify it once again? It will be helpful. Okay. So with that being one side of the story, let's quickly head into the next interesting bucket. And that bucket is the domain of privacy. To begin it on a jovial note, there was this nice statement which I happened to read. I'll probably share that. I shared a joke with my wife. My wife laughed. I laughed. My kids laughed. And so did Alexa and Siri. This one statement, let me tell you, my dear friends, gives you the entire perspective of what privacy is. In simple language, we all know that beyond a particular point in time, beyond a particular thing, all of us wants or do not want to be poked, our noses to be poked by somebody else. And we all know that for certain that we need to draw an invisible line beyond which you don't want anybody to intrude into your personal affairs. But what are the apps today doing? On a jovial note, I'm sure you read a lot of things on the WhatsApp and Facebook, where I read something which goes like this. What is the latest WhatsApp privacy? Of course, this is on a jovial note, no offense and nothing, no hard and fast rules, because it's a late in the evening, and obviously if I keep it too much of theory, it becomes too boring. So if a husband is chatting with his girlfriend, okay, according to the new terms of privacy, the wife gets an advertisement on Facebook which says that here are all your matrimonial or alimony dispute lawyers. That's basically privacy explained on a jovial note. But let's look at what exactly is happening. Today, apps are tracking what we do. Apps are tracking how many steps we take. Apps are tracking what is it that we are browsing. We are seeing, cookies storing which all this information which is actually transmitting something. We are seeing a whole lot of things which people are literally tracking us on the online mechanism. And this has gone to such an extent where certain apps are able to, or certain behavioral trends of yours, these apps are able to forecast it much better than what perhaps your near friends or even your family members can do. And this is where privacy all of a sudden is becoming an increasingly important aspect. Let's look into how this exactly, on the higher end is actually working. Okay. If you look into typically, what's going on in and around, people just want data. And why do they want data? They want data because they're trading, they're creating newer product and services. Some of these companies are just selling raw data itself, or some of them are getting some insights, they're doing some analytics, or they're giving you some sort of recommendations like what Netflix or YouTube does. On the other end, there is a huge amount of monetization which is going on, indirect monetization. Performance, improvisation, effectiveness, developing a new products, solidifying your relationship, publishing brand indices, and a whole lot of these things. And that's why people collect data. One should probably look into the, the court testimonials which took place where Sundar Pichai, Mark Zuckerberg were answering the questions from the US congressmen. In fact, they asked questions for which, these folks were answering what is the logic, but these all give us a big question mark. In fact, if you go to the privacy settings of Google or Facebook, you will realize that they're tracking so much information which you are going to be really scared about. So how have people been using this data which they track from us? Again, bring in some bit of humor and some bit of business insight. This is an interesting company. I think it's called Colibtree or something. It's a toothbrush, electric toothbrush, if I could probably call it. This tracks so much data about you. You heard it right. This tracks so much data about you. And what does it track? It tracks the way in which you brush your teeth. Okay, you might be thinking, why should somebody track the way in which I brush your teeth? Hear me out, hear me out. It tracks how good are you in brushing your teeth, how many times you're brushing your teeth, okay, and how well you're brushing your teeth. Must be wondering, hey, this is crazy. This is heights of, jovialness which Narasimhan is bringing across. But hang on, there is an interesting business model which is developed out of it. This was initially used with kids to motivate them so that, they compare with their peer group, how well each of them is brushing their teeth, and each of them were given points, all those things. Those are all the fun side of it. But adults also, they found an interesting market. In America, one of a very interesting use case was, or rather one of the biggest cost is the cost of health insurance, of which dental insurance is altogether a separate component. What this company promised was, those of you who use my toothbrush, we will collect statistics about you and we will provide this to the insurance company. Based on your usage, the insurance company is going to reduce the premium or increase the premium. So those who wanted to reduce the insurance premium actually went ahead for this, and they proved that yes, they are actually brushing it right. Correct? You can see how interesting business models are actually coming up. And I'm sure we know this, Netflix, the way they use analytics is mind-boggling. Their custom recommendations is powered by analytics, data, and artificial intelligence, but all of this is done using your data. Let me remind you, Netflix engines works in such a way. They have plans where, for a family, 5 users can use it. And for each of the users, it is so very customized that the recommendations given to user B does not come into user A unless they have some sort of a common behavior. Any guesses on this particular image? I know it's a Google map, but any guesses on this particular image? Somebody can drop it in the chat window. No guesses at all? Come on. Okay. So if there is no response, okay. So this is a geo-positioning system software of Starbucks. Starbucks, in order to deploy their next coffee store, they use a bunch of analytics, including the footfall of people, where they come, how much they travel, and a whole lot of these analytics and insights before they deploy where the next person or the next shop has to be set up. I'm sure in some places you have realized that the the Starbucks, the coffee shop, is within a very close range, but you'll still find 2 such Starbucks outlets in a close vicinity. And the reason for that is they, using their analytics engine, have identified that yes, there is a requirement for both of these to be in the same lane. Only then it is possible for them to actually make much more money. And that's the reality. And you'll be surprised, my dear friends, that analytics has been actually working like crazy. Taking this further, there's an interesting startup company. I think this was somewhere in Switzerland. It gives statistics on what is the footfall in nearby restaurants, based on which you can decide how much of a food menu you need to start manufacturing. And it gives you certain interesting insights that, how much food was left over, what was the waste, what was the percentages, and a whole lot of these things. But the real question is, why am I speaking about all of this? I thought our session is on data privacy. See, if so much of analytics has been used in each of these products, it obviously means that they're collecting tons and tons of information. And this tons and tons of information is something which is personal to each person. When they are collecting data about you, the real question is, are they not violating your privacy? Are they not going beyond what is the probably the acceptable line? And these are what questions which we'll have to look into it. Just to give you a heads up, privacy is not something new. The law of privacy goes as old as 1531, when concept of Justice Peace Act was enacted in England. But this law across the globe is slowly increasing. There have been various objectives, undue advantage, injustice, promoting electronic commerce, ensure compliance with laws. For example, in Europe, you have what is called as a GDPR, to encourage global trade, and a whole lot of these things. But let me come back to why this is becoming more and more important. The data protection laws tend to converge around the principle, and this is a very important thing, that you and I as individual should have control over our personal data. We can decide to whom we need to share the information, and we can decide to what extent that information has to be shared. Now, you put in everything in WhatsApp, you put in everything in Facebook, you put in something in Instagram. It shouldn't be a case where Instagram makes money out of it by a business model. Well, if you're doing it, you should be kept, or you should be made aware of it. And only after your rights and only after your rights have been heard, they can actually go ahead and do a certain activity. And this is why privacy is becoming an increasingly growing subject matter across the globe. And this has also brought in interesting things such as safe harbor, interesting things such as data localization, data sovereignty, that my data should not go beyond my country. This is the latest buzzword which is going in various places. Europe and US had an agreement called as the safe harbor. Of course, this was valid only until last September of 2020. This also has changed. In the case of Schrems 2 versus Facebook, the Supreme Court of Ireland, I think, or the European Justice, they held that even transfer of data outside the Europe under the safe harbor provisions is actually prohibited. So which means we're talking about a whole lot of new issues which is actually coming up. A whole lot of newer topics which is actually coming up across the globe on what is permitted and what is not permitted. And therefore, we have to look into certain prerequisites when it comes to data privacy. I'll come back to this retention, but very important is this data privacy accepted principles. And if you or your organization are dealing with data, please ensure, personal data more specifically, please ensure these principles are adhered to. What are they? First, the management. Whoever is handling data or a PII should ensure they have a policy, procedure, and a governance structure in place to protect the privacy of the information. A classical example is if you're collecting any person's PII, personally identifiable information. And what is personally identifiable information? As simple as your name, your contact number, your email ID, let's say your health records, a whole bunch of these things, something based on which I can identify that as you. Now you need to clearly define, why am I collecting? What is the purpose for which you're collecting? What is the procedure? Who is going to have access to it, etc., etc., etc. So the next time when you give any of your personal information, please keep this in mind. Does that management have a policy for that? Second, is the management giving you a notice that this is where we are going to use your data for? Or if you are the auditor, is your organization giving a notice to you folks saying this is the purpose for which I am actually collecting the data? It could be as simple as new employees joining the company. You give a bunch of requirements, including your, your visa, your passport, your social security number, or whatever is the local number called as, and Emirati card, bank account details. The question is, have we given a notice to the data subject, that is the employee, that why we are collecting and what is the purpose? You can say, hey, this is required by law, that's agreeable, but you as a privacy principle have to give a notice for that. Second, is the employee given a choice and is he given his consent? And consent should be either implicit or explicit. That means it should be clearly spelled out. The entity should say, hey, you know what? This is the purpose for which I'm collecting the data. This is the purpose for which I'm going to be using the data. The choice and consent has to be given. And when I'm collecting, am I disclosing the privacy notice? Is it mentioned in the privacy policy? Many of the organizations today don't even have a privacy policy. So is there something which is mentioned on those lines? And not to forget, for what are you going to use it for? What are you going to retain it for? And how are you going to dispose this data? So these are critical elements when it comes to any of these privacy principles. And one should ensure that as an organization, you take care of this. So if you ask me, if you're doing a privacy audit in your organization, this could be a good starting point for you to look into it. Next, who has access to the PII? In fact, you might be thinking that HR has access to a whole lot of these information, but the real question is, do they actually require? HR has access to, let's say, the social security number, but why should a HR have access? You might be saying, no, that is required for updating records. Okay, once updated, it's over. It should be stored in a sensitive manner. It should say that maybe only first few characteristics of a social security number I will display, like as much as your credit card statement. Your entire card is not displayed, only the first few letters, rest of them are masked. So do I have access equivalent to that? Am I disclosing PII to third parties? Very, very important. For example, if you are giving the payroll outsourced in your organization, payroll is outsourced to some third party. Is he or she having access to this? If he or she has access to it, have you disclosed this to the data subject? Is the purpose of disclosure, is it necessary? Have you taken a consent? How well are your safety and security measures? It could be the physical data, which is like your copies, bank statements, your passport copies or the passport original itself, or it could be the soft copy, the digital records. How well are they secured? What is the quality? Am I storing the correct information, or have I stored any information which I felt like? Or, is the information being tampered? And how am I monitoring and enforcing compliance? So these, my dear friends, are interesting domains which are actually growing up in terms of privacy. And privacy laws across the globe is significantly increasing. And this is one image which gives you a perspective. What is the overall framework of privacy across the globe? Red indicates extremely high, green indicates limited, orange or amber indicates robust, and yellow indicates moderate or very, very slight. In fact, you will notice most of the GCC, the concept of data privacy is just actually coming in. Okay, it's going to take some time. We just have the law relating to e-commerce, and when it comes to finance, there is some bit of privacy requirements. But other than this, there is no sort of a privacy requirements. With the likes of social media giants growing up, with the likes of modern startup companies coming into picture, your data is going to become the new oil. And artificial intelligence is the engine which is going to run this entire thing. So therefore, my dear friends, it becomes very critical for organizations to understand how this is going to have an impact. And one such legislation which shook the entire world about 2 to 3 years is the GDPR. 2018, GDPR came in as a replacement to the existing data privacy directive. And this brought in a whole new change in the way personal data is perceived. More importantly, the fines and penalties which GDPR brought in, as much as 4% of your global turnover. I repeat, 4% of your global turnover. So that's massive. So you made a small breach or a small, somebody filed a small complaint and you may land up paying 4% of your global turnover. Now this is where European Union started saying this is serious business. And I think we spoke about all of these, but just to give you a heads up, these are the general rights and principles in any data privacy. The reason why I've given GDPR as a base or a benchmark, let me remind you, GDPR became the benchmark across the globe. Most of the privacy laws across the globe have started benchmarking with this. A user should be informed why we are collecting his PII. A user should have right to access his PII. If he wants to rectify it, he should be in a position to rectify. Very, 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 very important is the fourth point. If he says, I want my data to be deleted, you have to delete it, except there is a contractual obligation or a legal requirement. Okay. For example, you cannot say that I will do a transaction with a bank and tell the bank to delete all my records. It's not possible. Under the banking regulation, under the OECD guidelines, under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and a whole lot of these things, these are necessary. The next bucket is right to restrict processing. You can inform that you shall not use my data for any purpose other than delivery of a courier to me. You shall not use my data for any purpose other than delivering the pizza which I ordered. Don't sell me promotional advertisements. Right to data portability. I'm using vendor A and tomorrow I want to go to vendor B. My entire history with vendor A should be transferred to vendor B. That's an interesting provision. Of course, not every privacy law across the globe has come up with this. Right to object. Right to object and say, hey, you know what? Do not process my data. And right, this is a very, very interesting thing. Right, not to be subject to an automated decision making powered by artificial intelligence, automated programming, etc. So these are the principles the data subject or rights the data subject has. And as an organization, you'll have to ensure that you're lawful, you're fair and transparent when you're processing personal data. You need to limit the purpose for which you need to processing. If you're saying that I will take your data only for this, you cannot use it for any other purpose. You can't send a marketing email. You need to collect the data only which is necessary. If you want to deliver a courier, only collect the name, mobile phone number and the address. Do not go into how many years you're staying in that place. What is your favorite gift item? No, the data should be collected accurately. Most important, how long am I storing the data and how safe and how am I held accountable for it? Just to give you a perspective, is there a data privacy law in Kuwait? Yes or no? The answer is no. There is no specific legislation on the data privacy, on the protection. But there are relevant sectorial requirements such as the banking and the insurance for finance, as I told you. The cybersecurity framework, Kuwait banking sector establishes several data protection related obligations. Your labor law, number 6 of 2010, for the private sector similarly sets out requirements that overlap to a certain extent data protection in relation to employment, how you need to safeguard. But as such, there is no key guideline. Of course, for e-commerce, I think some generic guidelines are there. But yes, expect privacy to come up into this domain in the next few years. So a few tips, just a pro tips, which I would probably call it, to ensure that you are taking care of data safety security. These 3 images just give you a perspective. The first image clearly says that, hey, it is this particular woman. So you can, you are storing the data, you get a maximum utility, take the maximum risk, and you're able to use that. The second is called pseudonymized data, where you are converting one form of data into another form, and the conversion logic is known only to one or two people. A simple example could be, I know only employee IDs, but I don't know who that person is. I don't know whether that person is a male, female, etc. So to some extent, somewhere you have it. Fully anonymized is, I have some random alphabets and numbers, and I have no way in which I can decode that and identify who the person is. So I will not be in a position to decrypt the logic and get to know who this person is. Fully anonymized is a fantastic way in which you can actually store it. These are a few examples. You have the information name. Anonymized can just be some star codes, but a pseudonymized can be some sort of an alphabet through which you can backwards work and sort of get to know what it is. Correct? So therefore, what is the key message which I want to give you? The value with data is something which is significant. Information today is being used as a strategic product enabler. But the organizations have to seriously make an inventory of what is the data they have. Get inspiration from how various peoples are monetizing the data, but very important, ensure that the privacy principles are taken care. You may want to derive economic benefit out of data. You may want to test the monetization ideas. You may want to prepare, how you want to establish this in the market, but do not compromise on the requirements of privacy. So that's my key message when it comes to the second domain. And I would like to stop it over here for a couple of minutes to take a few question and answers on where we are heading on data privacy and what exactly is the next area. So liking the presentation, is it going too much as a bouncer? Is it going something on a smooth pace? Some interesting insights, new thoughts? Okay, I see a few heads up. Video, just give a reaction, which is the small icon in the extreme corner. That will give me a heads up saying how many of them are actually active. And based on that, you're going to take a screenshot to capture your CPE attendance. Okay, I've got only about 5 to 6, so I'm going to capture attendance only of those 5 to 6 odd people for CPE attendance.
See, I mean, saying this, that I'm sure you'll have more screens on now.
At least I'm having some reactions on now. That itself is a big achievement. Okay. I think it's going pretty interesting.
No, so it's going very interesting and very smooth. Yeah, it's going well.
Great. Okay, so let's quickly move on to the next interesting domain, which is called as the forensic audit. Okay, and let me tell you, this is one other interesting area. I'm going to see a huge amount of growing importance in this. Forensic accounting, forensic auditing, I mean, you can call it anyway. Preferable usage of the language is forensic auditing, because you're doing beyond a verification, it's an investigative procedure. I'm not here to explain what is the difference between a forensic and normal accounting, but the basics we'll have to understand. In simple language, a forensic audit is nothing but, in a layman's perspective, doing some sort of an examination so that you can present it before the court of law. But not every time you present it before the court of law. Sometimes you have internal tribunals. Sometimes you have internal judiciary panels. You may have to present it before them just to prove facts or prove that something has happened. And more often than not, it is used in cases of fraud, embezzlements, and financial claims. And what we're going to restrict today's discussion is only to the extent of financial forensics. I'm not going to go into digital forensics, saying that how a phone is hacked, how a phone they retrieve the data. We're not going to that much level of detail. So why did people go, or what is the purpose of this so-called forensic accounting or audit? It's basically to facilitate a settlement, to identify a claim, for a jury to be awarded, or to basically identify what, to make or to identify the responsibility and who did what. There are scenarios where there's a fraud, there is a theft. Now you need to establish how it happens. Now on a jovial note, so there were two robbers who went into a bank and, with the guns on their hand, everybody became silent, and, the robbers took a good amount of money and they just disappeared. And one of the younger robbers said that, hey, you know what, let's count how much money we looted. And the elder robber said that, hey, you know what, we should not do all those. We have looted so much, I don't think we'll finish it. In which case the media is going to report how much is the money we have actually taken. Correct? So the next day he saw the newspaper article which says that, $1 million stolen. And these poor fellows were counting. They found only $100,000. Where did the $900,000 go? The bank manager took it off and he put it in the blame on the robbers. Jokes apart, but that's basically how complicated forensic engagements can get. You need to identify what exactly is taken place. Many a times it is done as a preventive strategy. Of course, they don't call it as a forensic because the word forensic itself is associated with negative. Many a times I've done forensic engagements calling it as a due diligence and we just got started. Because the moment you say forensic, the mindset is like very aggressive. They go into a very defensive mode saying, no, why should I give this? Why should I give all those things? But yes, there are principles which we should learn. We can package it the way we want, but the key aspect is how and where we are going to use this. So where do you think forensic audit is going to be coming into? Financial statement, computers, electronic discovery. Cases of bankruptcies and insolvencies we are seeing increasingly. Calculation of economic losses. For business valuations, sometimes businesses are overvalued and therefore forensic audit is in place. Professional negligence. So we can see a wide area where forensic audits are typically being used. And in this context, I want to, because we can't do the whole bit of forensic audit in a session, I'll speak about one of the most popular type of fraud which happens, and that's called as an occupational fraud. Occupational fraud is nothing but a workplace fraud. It's typically committed by an employee against the employer. Okay. And the typical bucket is under three categories, which you notice over here: corruption, misappropriation of assets, or a financial statement fraud. Corruption is when he or she misuses the position, influences to get something, either in an unaccountable manner or a sort of a, in order to give an indirect benefit. Asset misappropriation is where an asset is stolen or misused with saying that, hey, this is my asset, even though for all it's an organization asset. And financial statement is, increasing the financial statement, finances, revenue, the cases of Enron, which we kept seeing. So what are the types typically which gets involved in each of this? And to explain this, this is what is called as a fraud tree. I'm not sure how many of them how many of them have gone through this. Let me see if I can zoom this a little bit so that it is visible. Let me know if this is slightly better. I've just zoomed in. When it comes to corruption, you have multiple buckets: conflict of interest, bribery, illegal gratuity, economic extortion, etc. When it comes to financial statement fraud, you have asset revenue overstatements or understatements, which we normally as auditors, we keep on coming across. Misappropriation is where you have a huge areas or where it could happen. Cash, theft of cash receipts, skimming, cash larceny, teaming and ladding, fraudulent disbursements, inventory of assets, misusing, and you can keep on going into how much of a detail you want. But those are typically what is possible, and this gives you a perspective on various types of fraud which can happen. Okay, so if you want, this is taken from the ACFE, Association for Certified Fraud Examiners. They have this interesting tree called as the fraud tree. Definitely a worthwhile read for you whenever you're free. One very important aspect which I want to focus whenever you are doing a fraud investigation is this element called as the fraud triangle. That is something which is, quite interesting when it comes to, this perspective. Because typically a fraudster does any mischief for any of these three hidden factors. Pressure, because of financial, emotional, whatever various reasons. Opportunity, he knows that nobody is watching him and therefore he wants to do that. Or rationalization, there is some sort of a justification for the dishonest, like you would have seen in most of the movies, saying that why did this fellow become negative character? He has a justification that because the world was against him, he wanted to go against the world and whatnot reasons, correct? It may sound a little filmy, but actually that's what is the reality. But this went further to be expanded. It was also called as the fraud diamond. In addition to rationalization, incentive, opportunity, there also was a question of capability. I am capable enough of doing a fraud. Why should I not do it? And therefore, these became the underlying factors. So let's spend a few minutes to decode this because these are very critical when you are uncovering a fraud. What are the typical pressure factors? Repayment of debt. There is falling stock price and therefore I need to put it back to maintain reputation. I'm sure most of you would have come across Enron scam, Satyam scam. All these are pressure factors. There is a itchy palm. There's some sort of a greediness, a desire to live very well, high amounts of personal debt, unexpected financial needs, and a whole lot of these unwanted things can probably be examples of few pressure factors. A few other pressure factors could also be gambling, drug addict, nightlife, bad habits, dissatisfied with job, not getting promoted. All these things are a few factors which can cause that pressure. The second is opportunity. The organization has got weak moral policies. The top management over depends on him. Undisclosed contacts, capability to assess the quality of job, absence of well-disciplined environment, ignorance, lack of healthy audit. So I know that the auditors will never verify this. Therefore, I took that as an opportunity. So these are all cases where fraudsters start thinking. And the last is rationalization. Justification could be, I had borrowed money. It was not a fraud. I just took money. I will pay it back. There's a classical statement which is done by most of the fraudsters. The second is, the business did not give me enough money or did not acknowledge my talent. Therefore, I took the money because technically speaking, I owed, business owed me so much money. For all he's stolen that, correct? And one more justification is like, I've taken money. Nobody suffered a loss. Why should I bother? I've taken the money for good purpose, the typical Robin Hood approach. Oh, I didn't know that I was doing a crime. I thought it was a part of well-deserved. Oh, the business deserved it because they did not pay me, therefore they deserve it. So like this, lot of factors could probably come into picture. But there have been cases that anyways, business is cheating the government. What is wrong if I cheat the business? A lot of funny things come up, and these are all factors which justify. And when you are doing a forensic investigation, it is very critical for you to understand how a typical fraudster's profile is. What is the so-called red flag? You will notice that a person is living beyond his means. He would be coming in something which is just not imaginable. I've seen certain government officers coming in BMW and things like that. It may be questions, red flags. A person is constantly experiencing financial difficulties. There is a possibility of arrest. Unusual close association with vendors or customers. Sometimes even with top management, excessive work pressure, control issues. He is unwilling to share anything. It happens many times, when you go for audit, this or that person is finding it very, very difficult to share information. He constantly keeps on complaining about pay, their divorce, family problems, suspiciousness, defensive, addictive to various things. He enjoys superior trust and therefore it becomes a big question mark. Unusually he looks normal, or he prefers to always be working alone. So these are all typical flags, or profiles through which you can identify, hey, this person looks a little suspicious. So once you get these sort of profiles and these attributes, it makes it more easier for you as a forensic examiner to look into those activities. And just to give you a perspective, these are from ACFE Report to Nations 2020, one more wonderful, good guide for you to go through. It talks about what are the typical red flags, and you will notice that, these are the typical red flags. 42% are living beyond their means, 26% are in financial difficulties, 19% unusual close association with vendors, customers, etc. And you can notice that living beyond a person's mean is the #1 reason, and rest all of them are fairly much lower. Possibility of very close association with vendors and customers, because there'll be a lot of kickback arrangements, control issues, etc. These are again a few cases. And most of the cases, it was identified that a person was living beyond his means, he had some financial difficulties, typically, which is affecting the personal life. These are the common factors. So all these, my dear friends, next time when you actually do an audit, let these go in the back end, because an auditor should focus not just the financial attributes. He should also focus on the people element. Try to get certain information from people which may probably have an impact on this audit. And that is where all of this may make a lot of sense. Okay. And of course, there's just a profile of fraudsters. Don't think that only the male fraudsters were there. Typically, you had 72% was male, 28% was female. And this is very, very interesting. The median loss of people who were less than 5 years was only about $1 million. But people who were more than 6 years working in their organization, the median loss was twice as that of the previous category. So the longer an employee is stuck on to a same role, be extremely careful. The higher the person, or the more the person is studied, the possibility of he doing a fraud is equally high. And look at the last one. Fraudsters who are above the age of 55, the median loss is much, much higher than the fraudsters who are of age less than 40. So all this should give us, all these should run in the back of our mind whenever the next time you're trying to do some sort of an investigative procedure, some sort of a questioning, or even it could be an internal audit. If you find any of these behaviors, you may have to perform additional procedures just to satisfy yourself, hey, things are not that bad. And very important, how do you know they are concealed? The top concealment methodologies, 40% created fictitious physical documents. Okay, I know a case where I was doing a very, very interesting case which we were doing, and we all know in procurement there is a rule of thumb that anything when you have to procure, you need to get minimum of 3 proposals. So this gentleman had brought in 3 proposals, and I was going through it, and suddenly for one reason, one proposal stuck to my mind. It was not sure whether it was a gut feeling or what. When I was going through all the 3, I found some sort of a similarity. And if I noticed all the 3 proposals were made by the same person, how did I conclude that? The description were more or less similar. Font slightly changed. Date, format, all those things were changed. Everything okay. But there was one spelling mistake which was there in all the 3 documents. And that is what gave me the suspicion. And when I searched, they were, that house had ground floor, first floor, and second floor or neighboring houses. And in reality, in Google Maps or whatever search, basic search I did, the 3 companies did not even exist. 36% altered the physical documents. Very, very tricky. And in this work from home environment, we are going to get a lot of evidence digitally. So this is going to be very tricky. 27% altered the electronic documents itself. 26% create fraudulent electronic documents. And the best part, look at this 12%. They did not even do anything to conceal the fraud. Now I was thinking, what is the confidence level of these 12%? I was just thinking. Okay, they didn't even bother. Hey, kya hota hai? What am I going to, lose? If he catches all, that time we will see. So look at the confidence level of these fraudsters. Anyway, and many a times what happens is they are concealed within multiple layers. This is a typical chart where, one for each set of people, different types of fraud which may be committed. Against the government, it could be tax evasion. Against customer, it could be theft, false refunds. Against owners, it could be related parties. Against vendor, suppliers. So you have a bunch of areas where against each, set of people, there could be some sort of a fraud which is sort of committed. So what am I trying to draw a message over here? A very important thing which I want to make a mention over here, my dear friends, is frauds are existent forever. The question is, how am I going to identify it? And that's where your forensic audit procedures becomes very, very critical. Just to bring it to the context, across the globe, there is no forensic auditing standards. Our institute for the first time came up with this forensic auditing and investigative standards, and this is going to be made mandatory by the government of India very soon. Of course, it's going to happen in a phased manner. There's a newspaper article today. If those of you who have access to Indian newspapers, etc., you can probably look it up. And this is something very, very exciting and very futuristic. Okay, so what is it that typically is done when you do in forensic audit? The first is data analytics, and that's a huge domain where I can discuss only 3 to 4 hours only on data analytics for fraud. But yes, that's a huge area. Patterns recognition, identifying duplicates, same different analysis. Trying to identify Paretos, trying to identify relative size factor. These are all few examples of data analytics techniques which I used. Analytical procedures, doing some ratio analysis, inspection of the physical document, going to the site and visiting it, observing the document, obtaining external confirmation, very, very critical. Because in your books, you say that you owe the money to so-and-so person. In reality, you do not. Recalculation, re-performance, inquiry, and interviews are typically what is done. And interviews, there have been multiple types of interviews where same question is asked to different people in different ways. Same question is asked to different people at different point in time. I remember one jovial story, where in a college, four friends went for a movie and they came very late for the next day exam. And all of them went to the principal and said that, my tire was punctured, we are coming in car and we couldn't answer it. So the principal said, no problem, I'll give you a retest by afternoon. So you guys come back to me afternoon. And these kids happily went, studied and came back afternoon. And the teacher said, I will put 4 of you in 4 different rooms. So these college students were like, okay, what's the big deal? I've anyway studied and come. And the teacher gave a question paper which had only 2 questions. Question number 1 is that, what is your name? 2 marks. And question number 2 is, what part of the vehicle was damaged which made you to come late? Okay, so each person had his own. One person wrote brake failure, one person wrote tire puncture, one person wrote some steering problem. So you can imagine, how people can actually identify. Perhaps the principal was a very good auditor, but be that as it may, that's basically how things are actually shaping up. And when you're approaching any sort of investigation, you have to look into multiple angles. And this is Dinev's compass for fraud detection. It's a very interesting thing. You can again look it up online. He says that you need to examine the environment. Just like in the COSO framework, they say control environment. Here we say about fraud environment. Of course, we are talking on the negative side. Look into what exactly is the type of fraud. Where it could have possibly happened. How did they execute fraud, or what were the possibilities? How do you think you can discover what are the means, the source? What are the preliminary evidence which is available? Remember, in a fraud, it is very difficult to justify that this is exactly what happened. We go with some sort of a fundamental presumption and we ask somebody, or we question ourselves whether that presumption is true or false. We call it as a null hypothesis in a statistical language. We try to gather evidence, identify it, and identify or discover the so-called fraud. So that's a typical approach which is taken towards a fraud investigation. And another area which you'll have to keep in mind, considering the growing challenges, is money laundering frauds, which is again increasing, where the black money is, or the money earned from illegitimate sources is being layered and shown as though it has come from a legitimate source. So these are all things from a forensic angle, it is actually growing into importance. Okay, so I'm not going to the depth of it, but yes, what does it mean for you and I? It means that we need to build in a fraud detection program. First, you need to create a profile of what is the possible fraudster. You need to create a profile of how exactly things are happening. And you need to quantify that risk. The moment you quantify the risk, you need to do some bit of ad hoc trials, some bit of testing, some bit of experimentation. See whether these things are possible in other domains, other departments, other divisions. Repeat that. Communicate, notify to the people. Focus on what I call it as the broken links. See whether these sort of similar issues can be done everywhere. And once it is done, repeat this entire exercise. And that would be a typical fraud detection program. So ladies and gentlemen, I brought in 3 distinct ideas today. I didn't want to give an overall summary. I've given a section-wise summary as such. We first focused on what exactly is the new normal. We looked into what is the cyber security ballgame. We looked into what are the IT risks in the new normal. How is it that I can develop my own checklist when you're trying to audit? Then we moved on to understand what exactly is data privacy. Why is there a sudden huge rise? I spoke about how data-based models are getting, we gave a few examples of startups. And then we immediately moved into understanding the principles of data privacy. What is it that you and I will have to do when you're auditing an organization from a privacy standpoint? And last, we focused on what exactly is this concept of forensic audit. Why is it growing in importance? And more importantly, we discussed on what is called as occupational fraud. And the fraud diamond or the fraud triangle. What is the purpose for which fraud is done? Justification, rationalization, opportunity, incentive, pressure. And we looked into what is called as occupational fraud, fraud committed against the employer by the employee. And we looked into how is it that I can probably, have few methods through which, I can identify the fraud, starting from analytics, inspection, observation, inquiry, investigation. And last, how is it that I can develop a fraud detection program? So that's been my time, my dear friends. I hope I was able to add a lot of value in this short span of 2 hours. Let me remind you, all the 3 things are totally distinct ideas. So if you thought that, there was no commonality between all of that, the only commonality is that we as auditors have huge potential in all of this. It was like a mathematics paper where I had to explain calculus, trigonometry, and some other subject at one shot in 100 marks 2 hours paper. But having said that, I had to bring the 3 different perspectives. All the 3 are 3 different pillars, and there is a huge potential in each of these areas. My one simple message is, not all of this you can start doing it right from day one tomorrow. See whether even one of these principles, one of these pillars, can I enforce in my organization? If the answer to that is yes, my dear friends, I think the purpose of my presentation has been achieved. Thank you so much for being a patient audience. Being glued into the screen despite a very interesting India-England match, and I'm open for Q&A. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Anybody has any? How?
The very fact that we are a CA gives us all the eligibility in the world to do all these three engagements. Why? We understand technology, we understand risk, we understand finance, and to some extent we understand the legal framework. That is more than sufficient for us to get started. Point number one. Point number two, whenever you are going to forensics is more looked at as negative connotation. Try use until you get a scenario of an investigative officer. If you're getting those roles or a profile, you can jump into it. Otherwise, the principles of forensics, you can use it across your normal investigation or even in your internal audit. But the question is whether do you want to go to that much level of depth or you just want to touch the surface.
So there is a paradigm shift from what we used to learn as a first statement when getting into audit is an auditor must be a watchdog and not a bloodhound.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because if you're a forensic auditor, you are a bloodhound.
Exactly.
You just are a hunting dog. You go and identify what the issue is. But be that as it may, the focus is predominantly to identify what the issue is.
Correct.
And, to identify the loopholes. That is what comes from a forensic. Whereas a general audit is just you touch the surface, as I told you.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we don't. I think we don't have any questions as such. So Shweta, over to you for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Rohit. On behalf of ICA Kuwait chapter, I would like to thank C. Narasimhan for such a wonderful, thought-provoking session. We admire your positive attitude towards finding opportunity in every adversity. The new post-COVID world brings along new risk, and we should continuously question ourselves on the manner of conducting every task, be it as simple as working from home. We should also keep upscaling ourselves to be able to cater to futuristic industries as well as jobs. We would like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's VCM and taking out your own time. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our annual sponsors, Almula Exchange, NBK, Oracle, and BDO. Thank you everyone for such a wonderful session.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you can switch on your video, I'll just take a group picture of everyone. If everyone can switch on their video.
Yeah.
So it will be called as a group screenshot.
Yes.
Groupie.
Groupie, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, now
I think it's just similar to the new word. Today I learned a new word which was a fidgetal.
Yep, I am taking the screenshot. Yes, one more. I'll just take one more. Yes. Done. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Narasimhan. Thank you so much, Narasimhan.
Have a great weekend.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.